I think we can start now. So, Dr. Kamel, if you want, could you please try sharing your screen? Dr. Kamel, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
Yeah, could you please share your screen so we can start?
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So howdy everyone, I hope you are doing well, and welcome to Texas A&M University SPE Student Chapter R&D Series. My name is Qasim. I am the incoming president of SPE, and I will be moderating this session today. We are very honored to have a special speaker who is joining us right now from Abu Dhabi, Dr. Kamel bin Naceur, the 2022 SPE president. So this session is going to be on the hydrogen in the energy transition. And before we start, let me introduce our speaker. Dr. Kamel bin Naceur is the 2022 president of SPE International, the CEO of Nomadia Energy Consulting, and the chairman of the Murphy. He has over 40 years of experience in the energy transition and energy industry around the world, including private, public, multilateral, and educational sectors. He is the co-author of 19 books, 170 technical papers, and many patents, and he has received several industry and public awards. He is the graduate from the École Polytechnique in Paris and École Normale Supérieure in Paris as well. Dr. Kamel, we are very happy to have you with us. I know it's now like around 12:30 in Abu Dhabi, so we really appreciate this. And without any further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Qasim, for the kind introduction. Thanks also to the SPE chapter with the Texas A&M University for the kind invitation. I hope the theme will be interesting for you. I chose hydrogen because we hear about hydrogen in many different themes. And I wanted to start with something that came out earlier this week, which was the IPCC report, which is the sixth one, and the report of Work Group 3. And I read some of the conclusions. In 2010 to 2019, average annual global greenhouse gas emissions were at the highest levels in human history. However, the rate of growth has slowed, but it's still growing. Limiting global warming to 1.5 is beyond reach if we don't take immediate and deep emission reduction across all sectors. The chairman of the IPCC also said we are at crossroads. The decision we make now can secure a livable future. We have the tool and know-how to limit warming. And we also have options in all sectors to at least halve emissions by 2030. Limiting global warming will require major transitions in the energy sector. This will involve a substantial reduction in fossil fuel use, widespread electrification, improved energy efficiency, and the use of alternative fuels such as hydrogen. So we see that hydrogen is featured very high in ways to change the trajectory of emissions and take the world to a sustainable mode. During the presentation, we will talk about different scenarios for the energy. And I want to remind you of what would be the 4 scenarios that we would consider. The first one from the IEA, the International Energy Agency in Paris. First one is called the Stated Policy Scenarios, the STEPS, which is basically what happens if we follow the policies that are in place today or have been announced. The second one is more ambitious, and these are the announced pledged scenarios, which take into account all the climate commitments made by governments around the world, including the NDCs. So APS is a second one, which is more ambition. The third one is the one that is called the Sustainable Development Scenario, which meet the several objectives of limiting temperatures to less than 2 degrees, and also providing universal energy access and clean air. Then the fourth one is the net zero emissions by 2050, which has been very much discussed over the last couple of years, which is in line with the IPCC special report of 1.5 degrees. So these are the four scenarios that we will talk about. And if we look at them in terms of trajectory of emissions related to the energy sector, we have today, the energy sector is responsible for 35 gigatons of CO2 per year. Going forward, the STEP scenarios shows a peak and a slight decrease. The announced pledge scenarios show almost a halving of the emissions by 2050 to 20 gigatons. Sustainable development scenario shows division by 4 of the emissions, and then the net zero emissions shows that net emissions go to zero. We will still have emissions, but we will have ways to abate them and to eventually use technologies like carbon storage to offset them. So these are the 4 scenarios that we will look at. If you want to find more about hydrogen, there are many, many sources. I want to highlight 2 that are available free of charge. One is called The Future of Hydrogen, which was published a couple of years ago by the International Energy Agency, and one which provides an update on the hydrogen, which is called the Global Hydrogen Review, which shows the progress that has been done since the publication of the first report. So we may wonder, when did we start talking about hydrogen? Actually, the first person that really talked about hydrogen as an energy source goes way, way beyond that, and back in history. And actually, we go back to 1870. So exactly 150 years ago. And this is actually a very famous French writer, Jules Verne, 1874. And there is a book which is called The Mysterious Island. And essentially, this was a dialogue between the engineer and the captain of the ship, the sailor. And the captain of the ship at that time, people were using coal to power the ships. And he was anxious to see what would happen if the world runs out of coal, just like we are anxious to see what happens if the world runs out of gas or oil. So at that time, they were already thinking, what if we don't have any coal anymore? So he asked the question, what will they burn in the place of coal if we don't have any more coal? So the engineer said, we would use water, but decompose into its basic elements. Water will one day be employed as a fuel. Hydrogen and oxygen will furnish an inexhaustible source of heat and light. And there will be nothing to fear. And this will be something that is completely renewable as far as we go. So what he says is water and then hydrogen is the coal of the future. So he was quite visionary. And so we'll see what it will take to make and practice hydrogen. So why hydrogen is being used now? Why do we need to increase the hydrogen? Well, first one is that renewables provide the opportunity with the lower cost of generation to generate excess electricity, and hydrogen is a potential source of storage. Hydrogen is not an energy source, but it's an energy carrier. So it's not part of the primary energy mix, except for white hydrogen, which we will see. It can be also produced by various energy sources, and we'll go through that. If you have a car with a fuel cell, hydrogen will only emit water. And then there is a fundamental difference between hydrogen and electricity, that hydrogen relies on electrons, and electricity uses electrons, and hydrogen is a chemical energy carrier with molecules. We can transport these molecules. We can store them in a stable way, which is different from electricity. We can also use them in different fuels or feedstock, like ammonia and synthetic methane. And then one thing that I want to stress is that if you generate electricity, let's say by renewables, and you convert that electricity in hydrogen through storage, and then back to electricity, then the efficiency of that process is not high. It's actually very low. It's less than 30%. So it really doesn't make too much sense to use hydrogen that is produced from energy storage as another electricity source. And then finally, if you use fuel cells in your vehicle, you will have a 60% efficiency versus 20% for internal combustion engine. So for all these reasons, hydrogen has some great advantage. And so this is from Shell. This is showing the energy density of fuels, which shows that in terms of gravimetric energy density, in terms of megajoule per kilo, hydrogen is much, much better than natural gas, liquefied gas, and other liquid fuels. So almost by a factor of 3 to 4. Now, one thing that we need also to look at is that in terms of the capacity of different storage systems, and this is characterized by two main factors. The first one is what is the capacity of the storage system, and then what is the discharge duration, which can be between minutes, hour, days, week, and seasons. So what we see from this is that we have batteries that can cover quite a nice range from a few hundred watts to megawatts, 100 megawatts. We have the pump hydro storage, which is basically using water as to pump it up, can be used, and you have, and it obviously depends where you are, and if you don't have water and if you don't have elevation, then it doesn't apply. But what you see is that hydrogen is quite flexible, because you can go from the megawatt scale to the multi-gigawatt scale. And you see that you can go from a restoration time of energy from hours to several months. So quite a big scale that hydrogen fills. Looking today of hydrogen production, the world has been increasing its use of hydrogen from about 60 megatons of hydrogen in 2000 to about 90 megatons in 2020. And where is hydrogen being used? The biggest one is in the chemical sector, then in refining, and then to a lesser degree in iron and steel. So let's remember about 100 megatons of hydrogen being used today. And most of this hydrogen comes either from the natural gas or from coal. So let's look at the global hydrogen economy, the schematic that shows how you have hydrogen generation. I will get into more detail there. So you have the on the left side the hydrogen production scheme, which could be either from fossil fuels, from renewables on the top left side, and then you have water. You use electrolysis and then produce hydrogen. The second one is from fossil fuels directly, and you use a technology called steam reformation and cracking, or SMR, for steam methane reformation. And so from that, you generate hydrogen. That hydrogen will then go either to grid services. It can also go to ammonia for agriculture. It can go for natural gas networks, so it can be blended with natural gas. It can go for residential applications, like for heating and power, and it can be used for industrial application and fuel cell vehicles. So quite an impressive range of applications. This is showing what we have in terms of cycles for the generation of hydrogen. So let's assume we have the photovoltaic or wind. We use water, and then through an electrolyzer, we generate hydrogen, which then goes to hydrogen storage and eventually through pipelines. For natural gas, what you do is go through a reformer, then you generate hydrogen, and then the CO2 is then going through carbon capture and storage, and this is actually removing the emissions. And then there are other ones like the gray, pink, and yellow hydrogen, which we will see in next slides. So these are the high-level hydrogen value chain. This is from Wood Mackenzie, which shows from the production side what kind of technology you are using. And for hydrogen and using water, the electrolysis, you have a number of technologies that you can use for the generation of hydrogen. So you get to purified hydrogen, and then you have different ways of storing and distributing. And then on the right side, you have all the uses between chemicals, industries, residential and commercials, mobility, and power generation. These are the different colors that are used for hydrogen. The first one is the white hydrogen. In some rare places around the world, you can actually find in nature white hydrogen, hydrogen that is coming in natural condition. So that is but this is, let's say, the one of the smallest components. Then you have the black hydrogen, where you have gasification of coal without carbon capture and storage, and then the brown one, where you have gasification of lignite without carbon capture and storage. So these ones are significant emitters of CO2. And then the gray hydrogen, which is associated with steam methane reforming, but without carbon capture and storage. This is the between the gray and the brown, they constitute most of the generation, the 100 megatons that we talked about. Now, blue hydrogen is gray with carbon capture and storage. And what we assume is that we have capture rates that are above the 90 or even 95%. Then we have the one which is called turquoise, where we take it from methane, but we use a different process which is called pyrolysis, and we generate carbon black. Then we have nuclear power, when you have excess power generation, where you have different colors, yellow, pink, and violet, and then green, which is really the one that would have the biggest potential, where you have renewable energy sources and then electrolysis. So these are the colors, and I like this this representation of the rainbow of the from the World Energy Council, which shows all the colors associated with hydrogen. So and you have all the different applications, which is more complete than the previous one. And now, if you look at the maturity level of technologies across different production mechanisms, you're all familiar with the technology readiness level, which goes from 1 to 11, 1 being very, very early research mode, and the 11 being completely commercialized. So what you see is a number of technology, and we'll not go through the many details, that shows that where we are in those technologies. So we see many of the technologies being between level 4 and level 7. So that means that they are not commercial yet, and they need significant development in scale to reach commercial conditions. And these are the from the Hydrogen Council, which shows the expectations in terms of when the end use cases will be commercial for different applications. So it's expected that for passenger cars and buses and forklifts, it will be available now in the between now and 2025. Going to trucks and commercial vehicles, this will be done in this decades, and passenger chips will be going into the next 10 years. Now, regarding the aircraft, this will be going much more into the 2040 and beyond that. And then you see the different other applications in industry, in building, heating, and power, and then in power generation. And you see things being staggered between now and 2040, 2045 in terms of the use cases for hydrogen being ready. The competition to hydrogen is not standing still, because we have seen in the previous that we have other ways of storing energy. And so batteries are making significant progress in terms of the different applications that we have discussed. And so, for instance, if I take aviation, it could be synthetic fuels, it could be biofuels, and it could be battery electric. In case of shipping, methanol and biofuels could be significant competitors. And then for steel production, carbon capture and storage could be significant competitors to use of hydrogen. And here in UAE, United Arab Emirates, we have the first case in the world of capturing CO2 from a steel plant and using it for enhanced recovery. And these are showing the competitors again to hydrogen, showing the significant decrease in battery cost. And this would be perhaps one thing to consider in order to expanding the range of that one of the first slides, which was showing the different capabilities of battery storage. Now, let's talk about cost. The cost of hydrogen is measured in unit of money per kilo of hydrogen being produced. And today, if we look at the different technologies between green and brown, so these are emitting CO2, we range between 1.45 and 2.96 dollars per kilogram. If we compare to blue hydrogen, which is gray plus CO2 storage, so the main difference is related to capturing CO2 and storing it, you have $2.11. If you see the cost of green hydrogen, which is associated to renewables and electrolyzers, the cost is typically an average of $6, but it ranges between $2 and $10.6. So typically, the green hydrogen is at least 3 times or not, or even 4 times more expensive than gray hydrogen and 3 times more expensive than blue hydrogen. So going in the future, and we will see why cost will go down, it's expected the cost of green hydrogen will be decreasing to a range of about 1.40 to 5.58 dollars per kilo. And then 2040, we may go to an average cost of 2.70. So what happens is it's expected that the cost of the gray, the brown, and the blue hydrogen will be increasing. And this is due to CO2 emission tax that would be increasing the cost of producing them. So perhaps around 2040, we should start to see some convergence of prices of green hydrogen with the other hydrogen sources. So let's see how we could decrease the cost of green hydrogen. So today we said about $6. How do we expect to reduce that? The first one is through the cost of electrolyzers, which transform hydrogen into, water into hydrogen and oxygen. And what is expected that there would be a significant decrease of the cost of electrolysis through technological innovation. And so we expect that this alone could reduce the cost of hydrogen by about $1.7 per kilogram. And so get it down to 3.5, perhaps around $3.5. The second factor is going to be the cost of electricity, which with the innovation that are happening for both solar and wind, this will contribute to another $1.3 in terms of reduction of the cost of hydrogen. And then you have other components like electrolyzer efficiency going from 65 to 76%, increasing the load hours on the electrolyzers, and then increasing the lifetime of electrolyzers through different technologies like preventive maintenance and so on, from 10 to 20 years, and then changing also financial parameters. So with that, these would be the factors that will be leading to the decrease in cost of green hydrogen. And this will be happening over the next 2 decades, 2 or 3 decades. So let's look at now the expected cost of electrolyzer. There is a lot of research that is going on. There are three different technologies that are associated with electrolyzers, and the two curves for each type of technology represents different costs of per unit of renewable energy. And so we see the convergence by 2050 of those different costs of electrolyzers. And what you have is there the mass deployment of electrolyzer, where we will increase from whatever is today is a few gigawatts to 2,000 gigawatts of electrolyzers. So this is the representation of this electrolyzer cost and the impact on hydrogen cost for different prices of electricity, whether it is $65 per megawatt hour, or let's say about 6.56 cents per kilowatt hour, to an electricity price of $20 per megawatt hour, which would be about 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And in recent auctions in the Middle East, we've been almost at $10 per megawatt hour. So we can be with some sort of photovoltaic system even below that. And so we look at that for natural gas, but I will pass on that. And so these are for the different costs of hydrogen associated with blue production. The other thing that you need to factor if you want to export your hydrogen is the cost of the transport of hydrogen, and there are different studies that are looking at what difference it makes between ships and pipelines. And obviously the biggest factor is the distance of transportation. So you see different combinations there. If you want to ship from North Africa to Spain, the cost would be very small. But if you want to ship from Australia to Chile, obviously the best solution would be by ships, because the ships' costs do not vary too much as a function of distance. But obviously with pipelines, it is much more dependent on the distance of transportation. So if we look at now what would be the impact, what role the hydrogen will play in the future, this will be the share of the hydrogen in the net zero emission scenarios, the evolution from today to 2050. So we see today there is hardly any hydrogen, and what we expect that by 2050 in the net zero emissions, as much as 10% of the final energy consumption will be coming from hydrogen. And if we look at it in terms of volumes of hydrogen, we mentioned that we have about 100 megatons of hydrogen today. We will increase to at least 500 megatons of hydrogen. And we have the gray part in, let's say, this is the middle graph, which is 2030. We'll still have some unabated fossil fuels being used, but we will have a significant part with carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and then about the same level with electricity, which would be green hydrogen. And then by 2050, there will be almost no hydrogen associated with unabated emissions, and let's say 2/3 will be coming from green hydrogen, and about 1/3 come from blue hydrogen. And if we look at it in terms of how much emissions that would reduce, we see that hydrogen alone can contribute to 6%. If you add to that CCUS, that's another 11%. So between those two, 17%, almost 1/5 of the emission that need to be reduced. So we looked at the IEA at different scenarios. I mentioned the announced pledge scenario. In that case, we have some animation, but that's fine. So we have in the announced pledge scenario, the amount of hydrogen will be about 250 megatons, while for the net zero emissions will be 520 megatons. So quite a significant difference in terms of outcome. One thing that is going to be a significant area of growth is the electrolyzers. And what we see is that while in 2020 we have less than 1 gigawatt of electrolyzer, 2030 we will multiply that number by 200 to reach 78 gigatons, about 350 gigawatts, of electrolyzers in 2040, and then almost 1,000 gigawatts of electrolyzers by 2050, and with China being the biggest market there. So one thing that is absolutely required is to develop the policy and regulation that support a hydrogen strategy, either at the global level or at the national level or at the regional level. So these are the different interplay between the financial mechanism, the demand support, and also the different regulation part, because what is more and more considered is that there should be a certificate of origin for hydrogen that says how much emissions you have associated with that production of 1 ton of hydrogen. So many countries have been working to develop different policy frameworks for the hydrogen. And so you see over the last 2-3 years, quite a number of countries having developed their strategy, including the European Union, several countries in Europe, Japan, and South Korea. And many countries are also preparing their strategy. So this is a map of the countries around the world with the hydrogen strategies and the ones that are in preparation, and then policy discussions and demonstration projects. This is showing what could be the cost of hydrogen, because it's especially on green hydrogen, because it depends on the quality of your renewable sources. So you see that the regions in dark red are the ones that would have the lowest costs. But the problem is that many of them are in the desertic area, and they would have problems with water availability. This is showing the positioning of the countries around the world between blue hydrogen as a principal source, green hydrogen, and a mixed one. So we see, for instance, US as having the potential to be both a blue and a green. Canada has mostly a blue potential, and we see countries in the Middle East having and North Africa having both blue and green potential, and countries like China and Australia are going on on green, same as Australia and Brazil. We look at the positioning of the on the geopolitical side of which would be importers, which would be exporters. We see that typically countries in Europe would be net importers along with Korea and Japan. US, Brazil, China, and India could be self-sufficient. We have significant exporters, countries in the Middle East, Canada, Argentina, Australia, and Chile. And so we can also see at the demand, and this is something that we worked on last year, we see that Europe, for instance, would import about half of its demand. It won't be able to meet its own requirements. And we can look at also in terms of competition in terms of dollars per kilogram of hydrogen, which countries could provide the lowest cost. And so what has happened also over the last 3-4 years, a number of bilateral agreements between the countries to be able to either import or to export hydrogen. And we see the countries that have been the most active in this area on the receiving side are Germany, Japan, and South Korea. And they've been working with many, many sources around the world. And this would be a potential map for the future hydrogen trade, where we see the different points of the, and we have also the MOUs that are in place between those countries. So just as a summary, I know we are running a little bit over time. Hydrogen is essential to combat climate change. Cost of green hydrogen will decrease with lower electrolyzer and renewable cost. Blue hydrogen with CCUS will be needed. Strong government support is needed for decarbonized hydrogen and through a number of incentives. And future hydrogen markets will include industrial users, transport, buildings, and power generation. With that, thank you very much for your attention. We'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kamel. Actually, we have some questions in the chat box, and then after that, we can open it for the questions from the audience. So the first question is, have you had the chance to compare hydrogen storage capacity with geothermal storage?
Yeah, so, one thing about hydrogen storage is that you can store it in very different ways. You can store it in either in tanks, or you can store it also as a liquid, as ammonia or methanol. So you have a variety of options to store hydrogen. And in terms of geothermal storage, I'm not sure which one is being referred in the question, but if it is through the energy, the cost of energy from geothermal, it will all depend on the geothermal environment, whether you're going to have the enhanced geothermal systems or what kind of production methods. But typically, the storage methods are well in TRL mode of above 10. So it's quite a proven technology for hydrogen.
Okay. So I have a follow-up for this one. So in your opinion, which one of the three emerging technologies, like CCUS, geothermal, and hydrogen, you suspect is going to be like happening soon in general? Both, like all of these like three technologies are related to oil and gas. So in your opinion, which one do you think like oil and gas companies are going to be like implementing soon?
So I showed at the last how much the emission reduction will be associated with different technologies. And with CCUS, it was about 11% and about 7% with hydrogen. So I think that oil and gas companies will absolutely need to invest in carbon capture and storage. And carbon capture and storage will be required for blue hydrogen. Today, we have made significant developments in terms of understanding the storage part. We have projects like Sleipner that have been running now for at least 25 years. I think Sleipner started in 1996. We have advances in monitoring of CO2 evolution in reservoirs that allow to see where the CO2 is going and identify any potential issues of CO2 moving out of zone and so on. So all that, there is significant progress on the storage part. On the transport, this is technology that is already commercial. Now, on the capture side, there are still significant efforts that can be made to reduce the cost of CO2 capture. And whether it is in post-combustion or in pre-combustion or in oxy-fueling, I believe that there are ways to go in terms of reducing the cost and making the technology, let's say, much cheaper than it is today. If you are capturing now CO2 from natural gas streams, this is an area where the costs are significantly lower than capturing it, let's say, from post-combustion. And I think from that, the oil and gas industry has a very significant knowledge through its own midstream operations, but also through the different projects that we have had around the world now today.
Another question, might you have some thoughts on gold hydrogen, which is the hydrogen that occurs in deposits or rocks?
Yeah, so there are different terminologies. Some people also call it white hydrogen. And I think there are trials. I know some deposits in Africa, especially in the Sahel region, in potentially Mauritania, Senegal, where they think they have hydrogen, but it's still not proven to be commercially viable. So I'm still waiting to see any significant deposit of white or gold hydrogen being made commercial.
Okay. So we got another question that is asking about how it is easy to combine both CCS and hydrogen plants.
So if you take the blue hydrogen, which is taking gas and going through steam methane reformer, so what you do is, and I will perhaps go back to one of the early slides. If you look at the second scheme there, you generate hydrogen and CO2. The CO2 is pure, and it's being used for CCUS. So the blue hydrogen already combines CCUS and hydrogen production.
Another question.
And you can also do it not only with natural gas, you can do it with coal. And with coal, you have coal gasification. And in the coal gasification, you can use methane reforming to do exactly the same thing.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, sure.
So thanks a lot, sir, for your presentation. I had a question relating to the importance of like why today companies are placing so much importance on carbon capture technologies or even hydrogen storage. Is it like because it is driven by this existential issue for oil and gas companies? But at the same time, we also keep hearing that oil and gas is going to remain important part of the energy mix. So why is it that companies today place so much importance on these emerging technologies?
Yeah, so I mean, the answer is that if you want to transition from today's energy mix, which is 82, 83% fossil fuels, to a system that has much less emissions, the alternatives that you have are either increased renewables or the energy efficiency, which is reducing the consumption. And if you apply those two, there are some trajectories that could take you to net zero emissions, but the cost of the energy system will be bigger by orders of magnitude compared to today. Because basically our system, energy system, is not ready to shift to a complete electricity mode. So you need to manage a smooth transition from where you are today to a system that has lower carbon. And when we say net zero emissions, we don't say that where we don't have emissions, those emissions will be stored. So for climate impact, this would be a neutral carbon climate impact. And so if you want to have people spending 10 times what they're spending today on the electricity bill or on the fuel systems, it is one option. If you want to transform all the transportation park of vehicles, lightweight vehicles, heavyweight vehicles, planes, and so on, into non-fossil fuels, this will not take this decade. It will take multiple decades. So oil and gas companies are providing the fuels for the world. And what we are seeing is that coal will be decreasing in terms of importance. And also, most of those technologies will come with some way of abating the emissions. And this is where the CO2 capture and storage plays a very important role. Today, we are injecting, not talking about storing, we are injecting about 35 million tons of CO2 per year. We need to, if we want to be sustainable, to inject about 100 times or even 150 times more CO2 by 2050 compared to today. So you can imagine the magnitude of the efforts.
I see. Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot, sir.
You're welcome.
Since we are running out of time, I will take only 2 more questions because we have any in the chat box, and we have prepared others. So one important question which is repeated is about the technical challenges and the environmental risks to produce and transport and store green hydrogen in general.
So in terms of storing CO2, storing hydrogen in refilling stations, this is an area where there is some level of risk because you are storing hydrogen at a higher pressure. So the stations will have to be equipped with safety measures in order to make sure that no accidents happen during refueling, but I'm sure the industry will happen. In terms of transportation, most of the hydrogen can be, we already have hydrogen pipelines running, and also another part will be mixed with natural gas. So we don't expect significant safety issues if you have 10 or 20% hydrogen mixed with natural gas.
Okay. One last question. How will one be able to regulate how much water they can extract to generate hydrogen, considering the many countries share some boundaries, water boundaries? Like the same happened with oil and gas fields, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously there will be some regulations. What would happen is, I mean, today you have quite a significant industry in countries that have hydroextraction, which is water desalinization. And so what would be expected is that a small part of that could go into the hydrogen generation. So it's not to be expected to be a significant part compared to the normal consumption of water by those countries. So I don't expect significant issues. There are no issues today on getting water from the sea for desalination in the majority of countries.
Okay, perfect. I think with this, we came to the end for this seminar. Thank you so much, Dr. Kamel, for your presentation and for your time. We really appreciate it. We know that you have a really busy schedule. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And please make sure to attend all of our events. Tomorrow we have an event, a lunch and learn with Reservoir Data Systems. On Friday, we have a software training with Halliburton on Aries. And next week we have on Wednesday a R&D series in person with Aramco. So hopefully you will enjoy all of our events. And now wish you all the best. Thank you, Dr. Kamel. And hopefully we will have you in another in-person event at Texas A&M in the future.
Thank you very much, Qasim, and I wish all the students and the participants all the best.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.